Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint by Sing Shong. Chapter 380. Three Methods. Part 4. Han Suyang? I thought I heard her voice, but her aura disappeared rather quickly. Great fable, Keixenix archipelago, cannot acknowledge your selection. Worldview is displaying an abnormal reaction. Yuri D. Aristel, inadvertently now holding unbreakable faith, began trembling and shouted out loudly. You dare to do something like this. You're a suitable heir to the crown of Grunciad archipelago. Your throne is being handed over to the character Han Suyang. Worldview cannot understand your choice. Rays of bright light began leaking out from Yuri D. Aristel's body. Those were fables that didn't belong to her. Indeed, they were Han Suyang's, stuff that I knew very well. Yuri D. Aristel hugged her shoulders as if she didn't want to let any of those fables to slip out of her. I won't let Suyang go like this. Suchet, chut. Be still. I told you that I'll take full responsibility, didn't I? She wasn't speaking to me right now. I didn't want this sort of development either. I only thought that, if you continued to stay in this island. I could guess who Yuri D. Aristel was talking to, and what the topic of their conversation right now was. Exclusive skill, Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint, has activated. The time Yuri D. Aristel and Han Suyang had spent together was flowing by like a river of fragments. You said that you'll stay with me. You said that you'll become my guardian, didn't you? I really love the scenario you've shown me. I can't let you go like this. My bad, Yuri. Blood bubbled out of her mouth and she staggered unsteadily before collapsing on the ground. I hurriedly held her in an embrace. Most likely, there was a war being fought between Han Suyang and Yuri D. Aristel inside this body right about now. Great fable, Keixenix archipelago, is. Great fable, torch that swallowed the myth, is. Great fables were bitterly fighting against each other in order to take over her body. The surrounding folks also fell into a pit of sudden confusion as well. Our king has changed? But, with a method like this. So, does this mean that the legitimate king has appeared among us? The royal guards and the kingdom's citizens were exchanging glances with complicated eyes and whispered amongst themselves. In that case, what about our world's genre? Shoo! Have you forgotten that such words are still prohibited? Just focus on sticking to your role. Then again, I'd also form an expression similar to theirs if I heard that this world's genre had suddenly become Kim Dokja's company. Yu Junghyuk, standing next to me, spoke up. Kim Dokja, we acted too rashly. I know. This archipelago isn't prepared enough yet to accept Han Suyang as its ruler. Since she had built up a good foundation already, I thought it was doable, you know. I mean, she was the queen of this place up until a few moments ago. She wasn't its rightful ruler. Because there is a faction unwilling to acknowledge her that we still have the revolutionaries. A forceful change of the throne would always lead to a great deal of birthing pain. For instance, Yuri D. Aristel's throne usurpation during this scenario was not a part of the original Keixenix archipelago scenario. The Queen's unpredictable action, and our subsequent actions, were completely foreign events to the reincarnators of the Keixenix archipelago who had repeated the exact same scenario over and over again. Genre selection has been completed. Applicable genre's clear conditions have not been met. This world was not yet ready to accept the brand new genre that we had created. Starstream is discussing the topic of the applicable scenario's clear condition. Things have become complicated. Yu Junghyuk and I were looking at Han Suyang lying on top of a luxurious bed. From a while ago, the sounds of chaotic explosions continued to ring out from beyond the royal castle's walls. All the ruckus was made by two factions fighting a bloody battle, one agreeing to the ascension of their new ruler, and the other being the citizens who rejected her. Yuri D. Aristel's rule was bound to fail in the end, said Yu Junghyuk in a critical tone of voice. As for us, we should have tried to gather the king's flag-bearers scattered around the powerful families in the kingdom. After that, steadily erode away the king's influence, and unveiled a unbreakable faith, to complete the task. If that happened, the archipelago wouldn't have fallen into chaos like this. Right, that would have been the best-case scenario. If you knew that, then why? However, had we stuck to that plan, then, I stopped there for a bit and observed Han Soo-young's face. Her 50 years would have become even longer, you know. I didn't want to extend her 50 years by even 1 minute if I could help it. I was being serious here. The moment I arrived in this world and realized that Han Soo-young had to spend 50 years here, I just couldn't escape from this one overwhelming emotion. Someone was sacrificed again, because of me. Han Soo-young, who had to endure the time frame of 50 years, could she still maintain a normal, functioning mind? Was she able to maintain the ego of the Han Soo-young that I know of? This is all because I made a deal with the king of reincarnators. It'd be een beter if I sacrificed myself instead. I turned my head to discover Yu Jung-hyuk glaring at me as if I was a pathetic fool. His lips bobbed up and down several times, but then, squeezed his eyes shut as if to suppress his anger and leaned his back against the couch's cushions. I'd like to say something, but it seems that someone else will do that for me, instead. What? Right in that next instant, fiery pain shot up from the back of my head. Hey, Kim Dokja. I looked back to find a familiar grinning face waiting for me. Everything screwed up, because of you. Han Soo-young brushed her hair lazily and sat upright, before smacking me in the head once more. Once Han Soo-young woke up, we immediately dove into an emergency meeting. Other than her pale complexion, she was in pretty high spirits. I left behind methods for you to follow, didn't I? How come you lot can't even do what's in the manual? You guys are even worse than Lee Hyun-sung. You hear me? I spotted Lee Hyun-sung, guarding the door to our room alongside Jong Hui-won, peek his head inside through the open gap for a moment there. Kim Dokja. Recite to me the 3 methods I wrote down. First method, fusion fantasy route. And what did it say? Borrow the powers of the outer gods and clear the scenario. Hey, you. That's a stupid idea from the get-go, isn't it? Okay, then. The second one. Even though I felt this inexplicable sense of unfairness, I nevertheless continued to read Han Soo-young's book like a school textbook. The second method, fantasy. The contents? Start a revolt and kill the king. Hang on a sec, why am I reading T? Her palm smacked me in the back of the head again. God damn it, this punk. The third method, romance. And its contents are? Marry Yuri D. Aristel. And just what did you choose? The third method? And are we currently married? Nope. And why the hell not? I quickly evaded her flying smack and cried out. Hey! There's no freaking way that these are the correct methods. Did you write these down while seriously expecting us to carry them out? You think I wrote them for your entertainment, then? Han Soo-young breathed heavily like an angry bull and began wagging her finger at me. If only you accepted the marriage proposal, everything would have been resolved by now. If your legitimate claim to the throne was united with Yuri D. Aristel's martial prowess, the archipelago wouldn't have fractured into pieces like right now. But, if I did that, then you'd have ended up stuck. I could have easily convinced Yuri. My original plan was supposed to begin properly only after you got married to her. You were busy praising me for finding a solution on my own earlier, though? I was merely impressed by your stupidly bad interpretation of the situation. Damn it, that's how it was? Han Soo-young spat out a groan and continued on. So? What are we going to do now? The revolutionaries, or the royal guards, didn't matter which side we pick, the situation would quickly descend into the worst situation imaginable. Error has occurred in the scenario. Worldview cannot accept the conclusion to the applicable scenario. Worldview is uncertain whether the character, Han Soo-young, possesses the qualifications of the ruler or not. Starstream is discussing the topic of the applicable scenario's clear condition. Citizens were fighting amongst themselves, and we were unable to leave the scenario. I looked at Han Soo-young and spoke. I'm really sorry for being so late. She shrugged her shoulders and replied. Yup, it's been long, these past 50 years. I couldn't find the right words to reply to her relaxed attitude. As if wanting to lighten my load, she continued on. Actually, I can't remember all that well. But, that doesn't sound right. Do you honestly believe that I'd really live out those 50 years, just like that? What then? I forgot most of them. More correctly, I erased them deliberately. If I did remember them, I'd probably have gone crazy by now. Only then did I finally realize what her situation was. She possessed the skill, Avatar. And it was a pretty useful skill in erasing her memories, depending on how it was utilized. The reason why I left that book behind was to preserve the stuff I'd forget. You made a wise decision. It was a cowardly method, you know. Not something to be praised, anyhow. Han Suyang glanced at the corner of the room and spoke up. Well, there is a monster in the world who had lived far longer than I have and chose not to forget a single thing, after all. She didn't have to say who it was for me to know who she was referring to here. In order to lighten the awkward atmosphere, I resorted to making exaggerated gestures while raising my voice. Okay, let's not worry about that and think up of a solution from now on. Speaking from the perspective of a reader, the next portion of the story should be. Han Suyang realized what I was trying to do and quickly butted in. Nope. Judging from the perspective of a writer, the things we need to do right now are. Han Suyang and I began yapping amongst ourselves with whatever we could think up. Such as, summon a Dakibi and lodge our complaints, or summon a low-ranked outer god we are confident of dealing with, or even smashing apart whatever was in our way, scenario or not, and try to escape from here. Both of you, shut up. And both of us did shut up after hearing Yu Junghyak's words. Han Suyang studied his mood for a bit and stuck to my side while muttering out loudly. Well, it should be fine to trust the instincts of the protagonist every now and then. I nodded my head in agreement. Yu Junghyak opened his mouth in the meantime. Later, today in the afternoon, the flag-bearers of the archipelago will gather at the royal palace. That's when we fight. A bog-standard tactic, then. That's the only method. Yu Junghyak was right, though. Sometimes, the standard way of handling things was the best solution available. Night came knocking pretty quickly. Nobles dispatched by the influential families had gathered in the audience chamber. We hurried our steps towards there as well. The whole of the archipelago was boiling over with this unidentifiable hostility. The faction arguing to distinguish the legitimate king, another faction who sympathized with the dark magician, and finally, a faction utterly hostile towards our entire group. As we walked in the hallways filled to the brim with chaotic aura, Zhang Huiwen muttered to herself. If only the kids were with us, it'd have been so much better. How unfortunate. True, if the kids possessing taming skills were here, or even E.G. Hai with the ability to fight in a large-scale battle, we wouldn't have felt this much pressure. They have things they must do by themselves. Most likely, they are in the middle of their own scenarios. What about Haiyang SSI? Technically speaking, Haiyang isn't a member of Kim Dokja's company, so she should have been summoned to a different scenario from ours. If things were going according to the original storyline, then Zhang Haiyang should be performing her own role somewhere else. And that was something I couldn't help her with. I walked faster through the hallways under the protection of Zhang Huiwen and Yi Hyan Song. In front of us, Han Suyang and Yu Junghyak were competing in a mini-foot race to see who could stay ahead. It felt like I was watching a stork and a crowtit compete against each other. TL, an old Korean idiom. Basically, it means don't bite off more than you can chew. Zhang Huiwen, watching the same spectacle as me, sneaked closer to whisper something in my ear. Dokja SSI? Yes? I might be overstepping my boundary here a bit, but I think you should know about this. Regarding? She locked her gaze on the backs of Yu Junghyak and Han Suyang, and hushed her voice even further. In regards to those two's relationship. Chapter 381. 3 Methods. Part 5. Those two, they are engaged. Pardon? I let my jaw drop at that huge bombshell and slowly shifted my head over to Ehyun Song. He blushed his cheeks a little when our gazes met, and I saw him look away soon after. Yu Young-hyuk and Han Soo-young, the first prince of the Coincidental archipelago, and the esteemed daughter of an earl. Sure, there was quite a difference in height to overcome, but when looking at them some more, they did seem well suited to each other. Their personalities were a bad matchup, but then again, they had a surprising amount of similarities, too. My mischievous streak reared its head and I raised my voice. Oh I. You two kind of resemble a black bear and a newborn chick. Almost at the same time, gigantic murderous intent flew in my direction. I'll kill you. One more word, and I'll tear your mouth wide open. Cold sweat trickled down my backside. Jong Hui-won whispered in my ear. Maybe it's better not to provoke them? I guess so. By the way, didn't something happen on your side as well, Hui-won SSI? Excuse me? I replied Jong Hui-won's confusion with a grin and quickly got in between Yu Young-hyuk and Han Soo-young. Their facial expressions were frozen stiff as if they were unhappy about my joke earlier. Han Soo-young. Your role is the most important one. You know that, right? You gotta do your part properly, so that. She didn't answer back. Han Soo-young? Su-cha-cha-cha-chit. Strange sparks suddenly danced around her figure. I instantly figured out what happened. Yuri D. Aristal's ego was pushing aside Han Soo-young's. I'll never let you go. Yuri was crying out, tears streaming out of her eyes. Sooner or later, you'll regret leaving this place. All the fables you possess will wither away like ruins with no one visiting them, and no one will remember them anymore. And in the end, they won't even be able to stay frozen in this island and vanish from this world. I looked back at her and made my reply. That could happen. What was that? Yuri sounded dumbfounded. I quietly observed her for a moment. Yuri D. Aristal, this scenario's original heroine. If the scenario unfolded as it should have, then by this time, she'd probably have become the king's lover after experiencing a regular life of growing up as someone's daughter. If you remain in this world, you'll all be safe. I could sympathize with her, who had no choice but to say something like that, but at the same time, I could not claim to sympathize with her point of view. Because we weren't living in the same fable. In a way, you were simply reading the stories, no matter how many you had read so far. Perhaps that was why, all I could do for now, was not to arrogantly convince her, but to simply imagine. What if Han Soo-young was me? What would she have said right about now? I'll ask the king of reincarnators for a favor. Let us remain in this place together. And entrust yourselves to the samsara's wall. When you do, then, we'd live on while carrying out the exact same scenario every single time. What? I slowly blinked my eyes and asked her. Yuri D. Aristal. How did it feel when you became the queen for the first time ever? Her irises quaked intensely just then. The Isle of Reincarnators was basically a museum of ancient fables that had disappeared in the back alleys of the changing era. The foundation of this world was one of the third generation's medieval-themed fantasy settings. Yuri D. Aristal would have lived the same life over and over again while repeating the actions and speeches as set out by the great fable. Han Soo-young knew this, and she probably wanted to show her host the possibility of new stories. Tell her that we were not slaves ruled by the fables. Only. Most likely, Yuri had realized it by now. Because Han Soo-young was an excellent writer, after all. You like Han Soo-young, yes? If you do, please believe in her. She will definitely not abandon you. Yuri D. Aristal looked at me for a little while before forming a complicated expression. Her presence vanished afterwards. A round of lightly dancing sparks later, Han Soo-young's white irises reverted back to their normal state. She staggered a little bit as if she was struck by a dizzy spell. She then looked at me as if impressed by my actions, and spoke. Kim Dokja. Not too shabby, eh? I learned from you. Yuri might really want to marry you at this rate. Stop with your nonsense and get ready. We're about to make our entrance. We pushed the doors to the audience chamber wide open. And almost immediately, threatening air poured down on us from either sides of the chamber itself. At the same time, Zhang Huiwen stood next to me and spoke. I'm sorry about that time, Dokja SSI. I didn't have to ask her to know what she was apologizing for. In return, I'll protect you properly this time. I trust you. When Yi Hyunsong and Zhang Huiwen stood on my sides, the threatening air pouring down on me softened by a good deal. I felt reassured with the greatest sword and shield gathered in one place like this. I scanned the crowd of people lining up on either side of the audience chamber. On one side, representatives from the revolutionaries. And on the other, nobles and their flag bearers. We walked past them and headed straight towards the throne. But, just as we arrived before it, someone among the gathered crowd loudly shouted at us. Who is the king? Who was the king? They were here to get the answer to that burning question. Is it like what the rumor said and the dark magician is the new queen? Show us the legitimate king. Oh, dear princes. Tell us the truth. The moment I saw their faces, a realization dawned on me. None of these people were here on their own volition. It was this world's fable that had summoned them here. Great fable, Coincidental archipelago, has bared its animosity. Yu Yunghyak and I looked at Han Suyong simultaneously. She nodded her head and took a step forward. I am the new ruler of the Coincidental archipelago. The crowd immediately began protesting. You dare! Where's the rightful heir of the Coincidental line? Kill that wench. Han Suyong didn't panic and unsheathed the sword. And this sword is the proof of my kingship. Unbreakable faith emitted blindingly pure white light. Several of the crowd recognized the weapon and went down on their knees, but still, the majority were shooting the glares of distrust in our direction. It was here that Yu Yunghyak stepped forward. She is indeed the archipelago's new ruler. The expressions of fluster appeared on the faces of First Prince's supporters after he made that declaration. Vigorous opposition quickly rose up from the revolutionaries. But, how can that be? Something like this has never happened before. There's a first time for everything. Our family cannot accept this result. And at last, folks breaking character to voice their opinions made their appearance, too. Your choice does not align with our worldview. Our worldview simply wants. I addressed them with these words. Your worldview? What could that possibly be? The crowd shut their mouths. Without saying anything else, I shifted my gaze above to the message floating in the air. Genre of the applicable scenario is Kim Dokja's company. There was no such genre called Kim Dokja's company in the world. However, there being none didn't mean a story couldn't be told either. Kim Dokja's company isn't like any other genre, Yu Yunghyak spoke up again. Kim Dokja's company is simply Kim Dokja's company. Han Suyong raised unbreakable faith up high before stabbing it deeply into the floor. Just like how Coincidental archipelago is simply the Coincidental archipelago. Special effect of the star relic unbreakable faith has activated. This sword utilized ether of 3 differing attributes. Ether attribute is transforming into fire. Pure white petals of flame rose up from the blade held tight in Han Suyong's hand. I placed my own on the hilt of the sword. Ether attribute darkness has activated in tandem. And Yu Yunghayak's hand was placed on top of ours. Ether attribute divinity has activated in tandem. The 3 attributes of unbreakable faith, fire, darkness, and light began burning up at the same time. The archipelago citizens had never witnessed such a miracle before, and they stared at us in wonder. Han Suyong addressed them. The king? If you want to become one, come here and give it a shot. That is, if you're confident of grasping this sword. No one tried to come closer. Everyone gathered here knew the truth already, that the moment their hands touched that brilliant light, their bodies would crumble away like fine dust. Even though the overwhelmed crowd trembled in fear, some still managed to ask us questions. All of you, why are you doing this? What are you planning to do to this archipelago? This was an unprecedented development. And they had grown fearful of this world's end. The one who replied to them was Yu Hyok. We didn't come here to occupy the measly little Fictitiously archipelago. But, we came here to liberate you all. I quickly followed that up, and several people began muttering among themselves. You already know what they mean, don't you? Neither Han Soo-young, Yu Hyok, nor I said those words. We also can't repeat the exact same scenario over and over again. No, it was Yuri D. Aristel who had raised her voice, instead. She had finally realized what the conclusion to this scenario we'd been wishing for was. I plan to journey with these people. At Yuri's words, the crowd formed utterly stunned expressions. However, it wasn't just her who had made up their minds. I felt my heart beat powerfully all of a sudden, and someone began speaking through my lips next. If she's willing to do so, then I shall do the same. These words belonged to my host, 4th Prince Ricardo. Soon afterwards, another voice came out from Yu Hyok, as well. I can't let my feeble brother go all by himself. That was from the 1st Prince Shuichin. After him, 2 more voices came from Yi Hyun-sung and Zhang Huiwen's position. My sword will accompany you wherever you go, Your Highness. I'll protect you, Your Majesty. Both Bilston Framer and Eric Stryker, too. It wasn't just Yuri who had been watching our tales until now. Indeed, the original protagonists of this world also had been watching us. Great Fable, torch that swallowed the myth, is roaring out loudly. Great Fable, Demon World Spring, is looking at this world. We will participate in the great war of saints and demons. Everyone gathered here was looking at Kim Dokja's company. As the company's head representative, I addressed them once more. And we will liberate every person on this island from reincarnation. One by one, the crowd began kneeling down. These people, having been playthings of the Great Fable scenario for such a long time, were looking at us now. Let's all go together. The world was rocked by an intense vibration as soon as those words came to an end. That was the sound of a world crumbling down. An Great Fable, Fictitiously archipelago, is crying out. It was also the sound of a great fable collapsing on itself. Great Fable, Fictitiously archipelago, is activating its authority to control every citizen in the archipelago. The giant story exhausted its own existence to continue its life. Unfortunately, what made a great fable a fable was every reincarnator in the archipelago, Fictitiously, is resisting against the great fable's control. None other than the people in it. Worldview has accepted your reply. You have satisfied the scenario clear condition. Subscenario, genre selection has concluded. Scenario clear reward is being calculated. The spacetime of the applicable scenario's location is synchronizing with that of the Great War of Saints and Demons. Portal to the Great War of Saints and Demons has been generated. An enormous portal emitting blinding rays of light was generated in midair. It was the doorway leading up to the Great War. I'll go first. Yu Hyok was the first to walk inside. Other reincarnators, finished making up their minds, followed after him and entered the portal's innards. Someone even asked me this. Do you believe we can really do this? I do not know. I can only pray that you can. How honest. The reincarnator smiled awkwardly and stepped across the portal. The waves of people flooded out of here. Han Soo-young and I stayed back at the end of the queue and watched them leave. She opened her lips to speak. You should go ahead first. Most likely, she still had fond memories of this place. I figured that it'd not be such a bad idea to let her have some alone time to reminisce a bit. But, just before I could step inside the portal, she grabbed me. Hey, Kim Dokja. It seemed that she wanted to ask me something. I quietly stared at her for a bit, and eventually, she grandly sighed and waved her hand about. Forget it. It's nothing. What's the matter? I said, "It's nothing to worry about." She tried to avoid my gaze while grumbling loudly. I got worried somewhat and pulled my leg out of the portal with a sigh. "You can just tell me." We went our separate ways in a similarly meaningful manner the last time, and that's what's making me worried here. "It's nothing major." "Well, in that case, you can tell me no problem, right? Aren't you a persistent one?" Han Suyang sighed grandly once more and opened her lips. In the future, her gaze fixed to the floor slowly rose up as her words continued on. "In the future, when all the scenarios have ended, I may want to get back to writing novels again." It was the first time she looked at me with such serious eyes, and that took me by surprise, just a little. Meanwhile, she carried on. "When that happens, read my novel, okay?" "Your novel?" She nodded her head. "I'm giving you the opportunity to become its very first reader." "I'm not such a good reader, though." "Don't be an ass, and just read it when I tell you to." Fine. I'll definitely read it," I replied good-naturedly. Well, it'd not be a problem to read her novel. I mean, I liked reading novels, to begin with. However, she must have found my response out of her expectation, because she asked me back to confirm it. "For real?" "Yeah, for real." She stared at me with disbelieving eyes. "But, it might be over 3,000 chapters?" "That's probably right up my alley, then." "It might be boring, too." "It's you writing it, so that's not possible, you know." Han Suyang's eyes grew wider after hearing my reply. I felt somewhat embarrassed at myself, so I quickly said something else. "What genre will it be?" "I'll cross that bridge when I get there. How about romance?" "How can I milk romance for 3,000 chapters?" We shared such light-hearted banter while shifting our gazes back to the portal. That's where Yi Hyun-sung and Jong Hui-won walking together could be seen. I sensed this awkwardness in the air between them, and it was nice to see that. Well, those two might need 3,000 chapters, and then some. It was then, nice-sounding messages resounded out from the sky. "Restriction on indirect messaging has been lifted. Constellation, prisoner of the golden headband, is cheering out in happiness. Constellation, abyssal dark flame dragon, is enjoying the warm atmosphere. Constellation, demon-like judge of flame, is freaking out." It seemed that, with the conclusion of the scenario, the channel had been reopened again. Constellation, demon-like judge of flame, is shielding her incarnation. Constellation, demon-like judge of flame, is being vigilant of Constellation, master of steel. Constellation, master of steel, is feeling wronged. Han Suyang smirked and muttered to herself. "Romance, is it?" She and I stepped across the portal together. I could see the constellations waiting for our arrival in the distance. "You've come, Kim Dokja's company. Finally, we reached the opening stages of the Great War of Saints and Demons.